can see on the agenda that we're going to wait until the end for public comment. And then the other administrative item is that we have somebody in the room recording, so just so that you're aware that this is being recorded. I mean, beyond the minutes, obviously, the video. There's somebody for video recording. So my name is Lisa Hemmerly. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Cambridge Community Development Department, in case not everybody knows who I am. And I basically wanted to just say a few words, if that's okay, before we get kind of into the guts of what we're talking about today. I wanted to thank the task force for your support and perseverance. I've spoken to every one of you over the course of the last couple of weeks, and I really appreciate everybody's thoughts. I also want to thank the members of the public who participated in this process thus far. I've gotten a lot of comments from people, and I really appreciate those. I'm trying to be as responsive, and Chris is trying to be as responsive as we can be. So I just ask for everybody's patience, as we go through that process of trying to respond to people in a meaningful way. And I have to, I just kind of take my hat off to everybody, because this is a really difficult issue to tackle, I think. Maybe not net zero difficult, but I think it has its elements of being, an issue that people clearly feel very passionately about, whether from the perspective of energy efficiency and sustainability, public health, design, architecture, any of those things. We've had ideas and suggestions running the full gamut, and I think it's the task force's job to make sure that we're able to find a compromise and that represents the needs of everybody in the entire city. And what I think the task force has arrived at strikes a really good balance between lowering the light levels in Cambridge while not financially overburdening your neighbors, both residential and commercial, but then also being environmentally and economically sustainable. And based on the conversations that I've had with the task force members, except for the changes that we can discuss today, I think that we do have the support of the majority of the task force members on the draft ordinance that we've put forth. So I think it's important, at this point, if we just walk through a little bit of the process, the possible process going forward, so that everybody's kind of aware, because I think this is a learning experience. It was a learning experience for me, I'll admit, because I've not gone through an ordinance process before here within the city. I'd worked previously, just so people know my background, with the Boston Redevelopment Authority. And we had gone through some of those processes in my job there. For the process here, it's a little bit different. I'm not going to read these to you, because I'm sure you're all capable of reading the mission of the task force and the goals of the outdoor lighting ordinance. But this is all in your handout, so that you have that for later. And would be included in any report that we were later to provide the city manager and the city council. It also includes a timeline, just so that we can kind of bring people through where we started and how far we've come. And the items in red are potential meetings, so that if we're not able to finish our discussion here today, we can have a continuation next week. I think that's a Thursday, the 24th. If we need to have that continuation and conversation, and then potentially being able to make a recommendation to the city manager and the city council in the ordinance committee in that October-November timeframe. So the process, just to explain to everybody going forward, is that the task force would finalize the ordinance that's been presented. A report would be written in the ordinance, and this would be provided along with the ordinance to the city manager. And the city manager would then present the ordinance and the report to the city council. The city council would generally refer that to the ordinance committee, and then the ordinance committee would make a recommendation to the council whether to pass it or not pass it, who would then vote on that. And you can see that entire timeline there. So just so everybody's aware, in all three of those instances, the city council, the reference to the ordinance committee, and then back to city council, but there are 3 more opportunities for public comment. So it's not like it just ends here and nobody can comment again. That's not actually what would happen. So really the goals that I see here today are really to try to finalize the draft as presented, with whatever changes that are suggested tonight incorporated into the final. And then staff, Chris and I would write the report members of city staff, and we would send that up with edits from the task force to the city manager and city council, which would include a copy of the draft ordinance. And that report would include an executive summary and recommendations, an introduction and objectives of the mission and goals that were on the previous pages of this slideshow. The history and the community process to date, so basically a summary of all the minutes that are available on the website right now. And the report would also note if there's not 100% agreement on all the issues, we would basically discuss what the consensus of the group was, but then we would also include any additional opinions so that the city manager and the city council are made aware. So I mean, even if you don't necessarily agree with the rest of the group, we're going to share those opinions with the council so that they're aware then, and then if you're not able to necessarily go to the city council meeting, the ordinance committee meeting, etc., to make an additional statement, those concerns or issues would be included in any report that we put forth. Somebody joining us? Hi, David. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Great. So we were just to back up for a second, we were basically going through what the process was, but you and I had talked about on the phone about what that process would look like. So I just want to make sure you're comfortable if I just continue along with our presentation.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us on the phone. So I think it would make sense at this point, because you all have a copy of the draft ordinance. And I did make a few small changes. And before we get kind of into some of the bigger issues I think that people had, some of these are, and our legal department is also working on, making some edits, some typos and things that we found that we're trying to update. So for under architectural lighting, which is under definitions on page 1, instead of using the word incidental, it had been suggested using secondary or ancillary. I hope that's not a huge issue for everybody, but I just wanted to make sure that you were made aware of that change. It didn't come as a surprise. And then on page 3 under T, Lux, we removed reference to the word candela because it's not defined anywhere else and could be confusing to the lay reader, especially since we're not defining it. So rather than go ahead and try to define it, we just struck it. And I hope that's okay. It seems to make sense to me. Why define something if it doesn't need definition? And then the next change is on page 5, which is under D, light color, number 2. It had been suggested that the color rendering index of any outdoor light source shall not, where it says it shall not be less than 65, that again, a layperson, putting in a bulb in their house would never be able to figure out what that color rendering index is. So we've included language for the performance standard color rendering index. That's of course, obviously making the assumption that you have, you will have a lighting plan and an engineer helping you with that lighting plan who will be able to determine what the color rendering index is. The next change, and this is actually an addition, so I'm not sure how everybody's going to feel about it, but I know I've been brought up on a couple of occasions about automatic shutoffs, and we've done some research on those automatic shutoffs for things like porch lights is what we were thinking, and then obviously the landscape lighting and architectural lighting in residential districts, that automatic light shutoff controls, a daylight sensor or time clock are required with new or replacement light fixtures. The reason that we only said daylight sensors or time clock as opposed to motion sensor is because we really feel that would be a safety issue to have a motion sensor. If you want to have your porch light on, you want to have your porch light on because it's a safety thing. You don't want to walk up to your house, have the porch light flip on, and then realize that somebody's there. I think the essence of the need for automatic shutoffs would be because you want to obviously not have a light on all day long, all night, you just want to have it on during the night hours. So I'm not sure how people feel about this, but we can come back to it, but I just kind of wanted to let you know that we added that. do some research. Actually, I should say Chris did quite a bit of research to make sure that fixtures with automatic shut-offs are not cost exclusive. You know, because obviously we don't want to have people having to spend an extra $100 on a fixture and have an automatic shut-off, and it turns out that it's pretty much price comparable. So that's one addition, and I think that's the only actual addition that we've made based on suggestions that we've heard. And then under the prescription standards, which is F, we've changed the maximum initial lumens per light fixture to 315, which actually, since we're using the model lighting ordinance for these lumen levels, we wanted to make sure that we're using them consistently, so we took it from 390 to 315, basically match up with the model lighting ordinance. So those are really just some edits, but obviously that doesn't get into kind of the bigger issues that I think are remaining. So I'd love to go through those and just have a discussion about those. And I started with the easiest one first, if you don't mind, which is the model lighting ordinance lighting zone designations across Cambridge. I know a lot of people have questions about where those lighting zones actually are. And so we've included a map in the handouts so that it makes it very clear where lighting zone 2 and lighting zone 3 exist in Cambridge. And those would be in effect under the performance standards if you were to use the LEED light pollution credit version, standard I should say. So I just want to make sure that everybody's okay with that. And then the next issue is the auto shut-off, which we just discussed. So I guess I got ahead of myself. I was excited about automatic shut-offs for outdoor light fixtures. But I don't know if this is a good time if people have concerns or comments about the automatic shut-offs. Again, it's just a way to ensure that we're having energy savings across the city and people aren't leaving their porch lights on 24/7. And again, we're suggesting time clock and daylight shut-offs and not motion sensors because we're concerned with safety. If I don't hear anybody comment, I'm just going to continue. So 4,000 K color temperature. I know a lot of people have been writing me one way or the other about the limit being too high. I think when we originally discussed this, we talked about trying to tie it to the same color temperature being required in the city at 4,000 K. I know that a lot of people maybe do feel it's too high. I'm not sure. I guess we'll hear that tonight. We talked about that in Berlin. I know that we talked about it and we do feel that it's too high. I do feel as if we should try to strike a balance between lowering it too much more because then you get inefficient lights, and then you're wasting more energy. So if we can try to find a balance that makes, I don't know if we'll make everybody happy, but if we could do that, that would be wonderful. So I don't know if we want to just kind of go to the task force members. David, since I can put you on the spot, I don't know if you had any comments on the 4,000 K color temperature to get us started.
I would say, just given what we've, talked about today, I know there isn't, I know there isn't unanimity on this, but, I can live with the 4,000 but I do believe people should be made aware of the fact that, they have color options and then, it's an aesthetic addition for them. I would prefer it, I would personally buy something that's a color myself, but I think it's a personal decision. I think that 4 is a reasonable sort of upper limit.
Okay. Just go around, Bob. Do you want to comment or?
I guess I don't know. I thought in earlier drafts we were someplace around 3,500. And is there a reason?
So
Availability of fixtures or other issues? I don't remember.
what we proposed previously in the August meeting of last year was what we reached a consensus about was 4,000 was the maximum limit. We would list as a preference would be through 3,500. But said, no, you can't list a preference, you just list the limit,
That's the limit.
and then that would be it. And in the promotional materials, we certainly can promote, similar to what we were wanting to do in the ordinance itself, promote people use as low a color temperature as possible. It's just a matter of what the actual upper limit is.
So we can recommend things.
In the promotional materials,
And the instructive,
Right.
educational material.
correct,
It's different. It's not included in the ordinance.
correct, yes.
Yeah, I would, obviously it's promote a whole.
Yeah, I have, I organize all of my points that I'm making in the presentation, so I'd like to address these in turn. Just for this one, yes, I did not think that we would come to a consensus on 4,000. I thought that we would come to consensus on 3,500. I thought that one of the reasons we gone to 4,000 was that the street lights, which were spec like 6 or 7 years ago, at the time, that was a significant savings in energy if you spec 4,000 rather than a warmer light temperature. And so I understood that the city wanted to include a standard in this ordinance to reflect what's already been spec for the big investment of street lights. But I do feel like that's water under the bridge, and that since the city has spec 3,500 or less for parks and recreation areas, as I understand it, that would be very safe just moving it down to 3,500 across the board everywhere, and that all sorts of data has come out about better color rendition and also better, less attraction to insects and sleep issues and so forth. So that would be my preference, would be to go back what some of us thought was the compromise, which was 3,500.
I just want to go around everybody first.
I've done less research on this than some of my cohorts have. And if it's true, and I don't know if it is or isn't, that the city is routinely expecting 3,500 in the projects it's undertaking now on its other board, then that might be a rationale for saying that's an appropriate standard.
Okay. So,
But I could also live with the 4,000 as long as we're promoting the advantages over every.
We are moving towards the low, 3,000 to 3,500 in parks and pedestrian
it's
areas.
good to know.
We have started in the common, which you'll see. But we're maintaining the 4,000 for the street light.
Sure, but that was a prior decision that was made
Yeah.
in
Right.
In a different
a
technical
different
area.
technical environment.
Yes,
And
but
if
even going forward with the decorative, we're staying at 4,000. We're, right now, they're up over 4,000.
For decorative streetlights.
Yes.
But we're not, this ordinance isn't addressing streetlights.
Correct,
It's
but just
addressing,
as a,
it's addressing, a lot of other outdoor situations. And
Yeah.
if the city has moved in its head to 3,500 as its standard, then that might be appropriate for this.
Can I just go to one technical?
Sure. I'm sorry, Charlie.
I'm not going away on it. No, just the other reason why 4K was used for the streetlights is because there is research that shows that the detection distance is better with 4K than it is with any other source, 3K, 5K. So it was from a safety standpoint, and there's also research that shows subjectively when you go across a wide range of folks who judge preference of color, temperature, that they all end up about the same. That said,
Because I looked into those studies and I found the lower values.
yeah, the Clanton Ron Gibbons study was the one where they actually did a test with that. That said, I use 27 at my house. So no, so I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree that promoting it is a great idea, but I just wanted to clarify, but that's, the 4 had a few more things in it.
Charlie?
I've always had difficulty going above 3,000. And we've got into multiple agreements over the course of these 2 years for a lower number than 4,000. And 4,000 keeps getting put back in. So that there's a 4,000 on the page is just, it's not correct. You know, so if we can, that's.
If we can come to consensus on 3,500, would people be comfortable with that? And then we can promote lower than that.
Yes, I would be very comfortable with that. I'd be very
Does that
happy.
make sense?
Yes.
Sure.
Are we,
Is that, Dave, I'm sorry, does that make sense to you too?
Yeah, sure. I go along with that.
Okay. Well, that's great. I'm glad that we were able to have that discussion. If it's all right with everybody, if we add 3,500 and we can promote the materials and on the, you know, like a good neighbor landing page, that it's less than that.
Yeah,
Okay, so-
and I think we can do more because I've looked at a lot of product listings and so forth, and the vast majority of products not available in the big box stores are Norman products, so it's very easy. And they're also more energy saving than they are probably.
Yeah.
so I just want to be absolutely clear, so that's 5 people in favor of 3,500, and it's going to go in. Because we've done this before, and it didn't go in.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're
I just want absolute clarity that the 3,500 is going in.
Yes, sir. And we're going to promote lower than that. So I know that some people were concerned about, you know, the capacity of enforcement and the review process of exemption. It's, you know, and maybe that's, people consider that a stopping issue, I'm not sure, you know, and Ranjit, I don't know, feel free to jump in. But, and I don't need to, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. And it's not something that we can dictate in an ordinance about somebody's staffing levels. It's something that if the task force feels strongly about it, enough about it, we can add language in the report to say, this is how we feel about it. But it's not something that we can dictate in the legal ordinance. And this is a conversation that we had with our legal attorney. You know, certainly, you know, Ranjit has been part of this process all along and is aware of, you know, what staffing needs will need to take place in order to meet the requirements of this ordinance and the exemption process. You know, but I just kind of wanted to let you all know that. And if there are comments, you know, that you all want to include in a report to the city manager and city council, you know, we'll take those notes down.
Well,
Well,
okay.
so around that issue, I mean, wouldn't there be, I mean, can you take a quick poll about that? Wouldn't there be consensus that in this report you would, as a group, advocate the city, you know, focus its resources, ensure it can be ministered? I mean, whatever the right proper term of art is, it's hard to imagine that we wouldn't advocate for that.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that if we
I think
include that?
we need to look at it.
And what is that?
This requires a little bit of a preamble, because when I went through the ordinance to try to figure out what would be the enforcement procedures, I figured out that the draft ordinance requires no property owner or lessee with existing light fixtures to come into compliance for a minimum of 5 years.
Yep.
And only after 5 years can an aggrieved abutter venture a complaint. And then only after ISD, and then ISD has to get permission, as I understand, from the offending property owner or a court order to even get on the property to confirm the rating of their light bulb that issue a citation.
Or the complainant. They would go,
Right.
the person would go onto the complainant's property, so if you made the complaint, the inspector would go on your property to check the light
okay,
level.
so the problem is that by definition, all existing lighting installations are to be handled under the prescriptive standards, and the prescriptive standards do not include a measurement of light trespass. They require only a daytime view of the rating of the bulbs in the fixture with their vertical height and the presence or absence of shielding at the horizontal level of the head. That's why everyone's being assured that ISD, which doesn't really have staff after dark during the spring and summer, will be able to handle the complaints. And that the ISD staff will not need specialist training, nor will they need lux meters, because it will be business as usual in terms of enforcement. For new property businesses and residents, they're being allowed to file an affidavit and a lighting plan that says they're not blasting any neighbor's property with more than 8 lux. That's 8 full moons shining in the neighbor's bedroom window at the property line, and they're having to put top shields, not side shields, but just top shields on their light at any height. Or they can say they're designing their lighting to earn the LEED lighting pollution credit, which is actually a very good thing, but there's very little incentive in the ordinance for them to do it. The so-called lighting plan, the definition of the lighting plan in the draft ordinance, requires very few details to be included. And I've seen many other ordinances that spell out exactly what details need to be included in the lighting plan, so that someone in ISD would have a hope of being able to tell which ones were following the intent of the ordinance and which weren't. And these key details are to be reviewed by Ranji and one of his overstretched staff and filed away, and there's no inspection afterwards to make sure it complies. So I finally realized that, to me, what seemed to be driving a lot of the motion behind the drafting of this order, and I think maybe it's partly from the city manager because he has to watch the budgets, but was to minimize any efforts city departments and staff will have to make in the future to participate in a real public-private partnership to make our city sunshine landscape and skyline livable, beautiful, and safe from vision-reducing glare. And I think that's a shame because millions of dollars in new work, industry, commercial, residential development, we have coming into the city, and it seems that the managers we hired are not willing to put any of that revenue into planning and guiding the city's nightscape. So here's what I propose. I think we need to have timely relief to the people who've been coming to these meetings year after year and asking for some protection from spotlights shining in their kids' bedroom windows and from people being blinded as they walk down the sidewalk from unnecessarily bright wall packs. I think that we can easily require within 6 months after the 3-month hiatus after passage and before the ordinance goes into effect, that relief from simple installations that can be amended by one or more of the following: a change of light bulb, a change of angle, an addition of shielding, or a modification or replacement at a cost of less than $200. And since this is complaint-driven, ISD must be organized to follow through with hours, inspectors, and processes. And I think we need to demand on Ranjit's behalf that he has the resources to do this. I've looked on the Inspectional Services website. There's no portal for anyone to make any comment or complaint about lighting in the city. And I think that we ought to encourage people to make early changes by waiving the permit fee, the electric permit fee, for any resident or business willing to adjust their lighting to conform within the first 3 years, as well as provide the educational materials, including motivations, diagrams, and instructions for easy fixes, including very specific products.
I'm going to try to, you brought up a lot of good points, and I'm going to try to hit them all. If I forgot one, please remind me. It's okay, because I'm not trying to miss it on purpose. I think that that every city, and we did a comparison, this is only for an example purposes, and we didn't look at every city everywhere all the time, but most cities have a phase-in period.
Yep.
I think the discussion occurred that 5 years was a minimum lease time, so I think that's where the discussion started with the 5 years. I would be concerned about going too close to the other side because we don't want to overburden our neighbors, by having everybody throw out their light bulbs all of a sudden that they do have, right? Because that's really bad for the environment, and I know that you're supposed to recycle them, but how many people unfortunately probably do recycle light bulbs that have mercury in them, or having your 87-year-old neighbor have to replace their light fixture really in a too short period of time. So I hope that we can find somewhere between immediate and the 5 years to upgrade light fixtures. place that if we can, and Ranjit, I'm sorry if I'm throwing you on the bus on this one, that, you know, that they would be able to file an online complaint of some sort. You know, or at least there'd be a place to say this is where, you know, the person that you would file a complaint with. I don't think that that's an issue. We do that with other websites.
By the way, I've seen in the model ordinance that they do suggest that there be remedies for more.
In the short term.
Yes, and I've looked at a lot more ordinances across the country. These are mostly local ordinances. And some of the ordinances across the country do actually delineate these 3 fixes that you could do, the 4 fixes that you could do
Okay.
with very little trouble and money out front. And so I think we should be able to come to some kind of agreement that there can be some kind of relief that wouldn't be too burdensome. Part of the problem is also, and I'm going to get to this later when we talk about the zones, is that there's a difference between the concern about 5-year leases in a commercial zone where this is a big capital expense for people to have to change. And yes, they do need 5 years or in some part. Or between primarily residential districts where really someone can screw in a light bulb or tilt their wall pack down. And I think you would just owe it to the people of the city to just be helpful in that regard.
Ranjit, I don't know if you can speak to the, you know, the timely relief of like the change of light bulb or the change of direction, you know, and how that would be incorporated, you know, what the possibilities are with that. I mean, we could certainly include, we certainly plan on doing a strong campaign for good neighbor relief, you know, and I think that's going to be multi-tiered, you know, through, I keep wandering on the citywide planning process. There's going to be like 10,000 brochures from the city because everybody's going to be handing out their, you know, we're going to be handing out our good neighbor lighting brochure. You know, but certainly, you know, an email campaign and then obviously, you know, papering the neighborhood, letting people know. So
I
you
think
can speak to that.
we should, in the ordinance, we should say how to prevent direct light. If we say that, they're suggesting something and if it goes wrong, they'll put the blame on us. So I think they just say, if too much light coming into the building property, they have to correct it. Whatever it means, like tilting or new fixture, or do something else.
So you're saying that
Like
if
now,
there was a way,
It's the existing ordinance, that's what we do. We tell them if light is coming into the property, do something about it. That's left to them. They can change the fixture,
Yeah.
put it down, or change the
so if
direction.
a complaint comes through now,
Yeah.
you call the property owner,
We send an inspector to the site.
and are they allowed on the site?
Well, they ask permission to go in.
Okay,
And how often, I mean,
And most of the time they let us go.
okay, so if they let you, they go in, what, I mean, you're going during the daytime, I presume, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, in fact, yesterday it was 8 o'clock at night to your property.
You came to my
Well,
property,
no, next door's property because there was a complaint about lighting.
I didn't make that complaint.
Well, what I wanted to do was put a nail in the coffin of the mythology that is recited to you by multiple people who are like in the audience, and is that we don't have protection in residential areas. We do, and I have a handout, here it is. And it's actually very good protection. And this ordinance doesn't rise to it. And it also doesn't rise to it in enforceability. And another myth is that I said the ordinance was broken. Here's my PowerPoint slide. It says existing language for the residential areas. No changes proposed.
Is this in the zoning? I'm sorry, I can't
This
see.
is
where
in the
you're-
zoning ordinance.
Yeah, and that wouldn't change.
No,
No, that's remaining.
well, not entirely. It's you have a line that overrides it in its entirety.
No,
So-
you told me that we would take 7.20 out of the zoning ordinance if this.
Oh, if they were in conflict. If they're in conflict.
Okay,
Very far.
In other words, I said this at the last meeting. In other words, if, as Ranjit says, if you go to the ordinance and you read it and it says you can put a row or a wall of 40-watt light bulbs at your property line, which is what it says, you can do that. And that we care about, the person who lives next door. So we already went through this. At its heart, this ordinance is unenforceable. And the justification for it is saying that the existing law is not, it either doesn't exist, which here it is, or is unenforceable. And here's a guy who's enforced it many times. And I've seen
That's
it.
what I'm trying to find out about from,
So-
excuse me, Charlie.
Well, I just want to say the first thing they do is they usually have a discussion with the person whose property. What I try to do in yours was just have a case study. Are these lights legal or illegal? Just get to that question point. And how do they decide that? What is the thought process? And then the rest of the things is they just become, their first thing is what Andrea does so well, is be this intermediary and just sort of charm people into being a better neighbor. And then if that doesn't work, then it escalates, and it eventually ends up into these ridiculous court proceedings which go nowhere for many years, in fact, decades on 43 Cedar Street. Decades, 20 years. So I went through all this the last time. I went go through it every meeting, and it's ignored. So at its heart, that's, and I said what I've done is, and I told everybody, is I've just pruned out everything except for lighting zone 3, because the low density residential areas are actually protected. It's the other areas almost have no regulation at all. It's the parking lot regulations. So that's the point. You're weakening people's existing protections by having something unenforceable. And Quentin Zondervan, who's not here today, he
I respectfully disagree. I actually think this is actually more enforceable than the current zoning because we give an actual value for the inspectors and Runji is not.
never enforced it.
Charlie, I'd just like to finish if that's okay. Because we actually give values for the inspectors to go out and be able to measure from an abutter's property or from the actual person's property if they are allowed, the inspectors are allowed on their property. So I actually think this is more enforceable than the zoning that we have right now.
So can
So
I
I'm just
just
gonna
go back
respectfully
to the
disagree on that point.
original question, because Charlie, we're not talking about the zoning ordinance, and that only provides protection to the very few percent of people who live in A, B, C, and C1. And I think we're looking for broader help here. So I just want to
There are
understand.
changes to the zoning ordinance as part of this package.
Yeah,
It's on this page here.
I think we'll get to that. So I just want to know, so you're saying that.
So if there are values, as we said, the numbers to check for, it will be easier for us than just plain language. Otherwise, you have to make a determination where there is glare or coming in problem. At least if you use a measurement device, then we can measure the intensity of the light.
Okay, so
So I think that's what we are proposing in the ordinance. Right?
And we're also proposing limits on the
Propose new fixtures.
lumens that you can have and the design of the fixture which you can have,
So,
which currently isn't the
and
case.
I'm going to get to that when we get to that part of it. But I just want to ask whether what I've suggested and proposed as an interim solution for relief for people who have acute light trespass is a possibility for us to include in a revision to
I
this.
think we can draft language and send that around to you. I mean, it's going to take legal more than, we won't be able to do that by the 24th. It'll take them longer to turn that around, but we can propose that language, send it around to you all, and then send it to legal, have them look just at that piece,
Okay.
Now, that would take care of obviously the immediate issue, right? And part of that good neighbor campaign. Then you still have a 5-year phase-in for the remainder. Is that where we're still okay with, or I just want to
Well,
make sure?
I want to make sure that there's immediate relief provided for, I don't think it should be, there could be people in offices who are having this problem, but just for acute
So what you're proposing is that there would still be the zoning regulations that would be protecting within that 5-year period, the residential districts, that until the 5 years kicks in.
Yes, that would be good, but that's not what I'm saying, Chris. What I'm saying is that for all of Cambridge, or at least all of Zone 2 Cambridge, people would be able to ask if they weren't successful being good neighbors and having those conversations. They would be able to go to a portal or call up Ranji on ISD and say, I have this problem, I've got a spotlight in my kid's window, or there's a spotlight in the street that makes it hard to see who's coming at me. Can you please go out and check and see whether we can get this in compliance in some easy manner that doesn't require 5 years and a huge investment?
And it may just include something simple as turning the light away.
It may be, I said 4 things. It could be changing the bulb. It could be redirecting the light. It could be adding shielding to the light. Or it could be a quick replacement of a small isolated fixture that's going to cost $200 a yet, and we would waive the electric leaf fee for the permit in order to encourage adherence to the spirit of this legislation.
And before I, go ahead and, say that we're going to do anything, I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that route. And if they are, oh, you ready to say something, you're just waiting until we finish talking. We can, and obviously we have to find out if that's actually enforceable in the short term.
My question is that you don't normally recommend or suggest something.
You recommend what?
Anything. Like, you don't say you have to do this, you have to
Right.
follow the ordinance, that's about it.
Right.
You don't say turn this light this way, turn that light this way. That means you're recommending something which is.
So the question would be, after the 3 months when this goes into effect, that if someone complained and said, I have this problem, that you could make the property owner aware that currently there is a lighting ordinance, and that people who can easily change their fixtures to be in conformance, within the next 6 months, are asked to do that. And here is the piece of paper that shows you some pathways you can take to do this quickly and expediently without too much trouble or expense. And if you have to rewire, we'll waive the permit fee.
I have no idea what the legal precedent of that is.
Yeah.
I'd have to talk to the legal department, and I can't really say anything else about it. And you might have more experience than I do in this.
I don't know, you can.
It does seem like a rational solution to say, if there's an easy fix, you shouldn't have to wait 5 years to make a complaint.
Yeah.
There ought to be a way that we.
Yeah, legally, I
the
just don't know what that
the city
is.
can
So.
figure that.
And encourage them, yes, it's some way to encourage them to do it.
Right.
You're not forcing them to do it, but you're encouraging them to do it.
It's, that's based on a complaint, correct?
Yeah,
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that by law, they can't complain, but you say, well, now you complain and you do something. But it seems to me that the real complexities, and it could take a couple of pages, you have to decide, now you have to decide that not only is it not in compliance, but it's acutely not in compliance. And now you have to quantify the expenditures. And there's inflation and this and that, and we see this in other parts of the zoning ordinance, where, with the incentive zoning fees. And this, I think Collins has done all the research and found existing examples, and I think this is exactly the right thing to do. But we wouldn't be here writing a law if you just go over to your neighbor and say, oh, turn that down. The reason why we're here is because we're dealing with people who don't turn it down and have no intention of turning it down. And so it's nice that you talk about the neighborhood issues and stuff, but I go back to enforcement. People don't want enforcement, we can't enforce it. It won't happen. So, in Rangita's personal experience of many years of non-enforcement, he has many more experiences of just asking nicely. And, so I'd like to be, I think the 5 years is ridiculous. I don't see any reason for 5 years. These things are not that expensive to change. It's, so I don't see the 5 years at all.
How does everybody else feel about the 5 years? Aside from the obvious issue that we got. Bob, David, anybody?
Oh, look, I mean, I have to say, 5 years seems like a long time, and I want to come back to the incentive program for a second. But, that is sort of the standard in the world about implementing these kinds of things. I have to take the law department's recommendation about the horizons that you can do. I mean, if we have the law department what the horizon needs to be, and their recommendation is 5, and maybe I don't have an opinion about that as a lawyer, if that's really the right number. But that having been said, if the city has a commitment to this issue, incentivizing, including having a fund of some kind that people can apply to remedy this before that happens. I'm intrigued by these comments about, is there anything we can do to put professional services and others in a position to tell people how to solve the problem and get them in a direction that, they might be, and this I know is a political issue and it's a little bit outside of, what we've been talking about, but to the extent that, and I'm going to digress for a moment, the city had a commitment to storefronts in this city. And in fact, through grants and others, they had matching grants for people who were willing to take on accessibility and take on changing their signs, taking on, beautifying their storefronts. I think the city has a tradition of, basically incentivizing people to do the right thing beyond education. And I'd be interested, and so this is my answer to the 5 years, is to the extent that we can't force them, but we can put people in a position where it is a reasonably small expense or something that they can even get around. I think that that's an interesting question to ask whoever this group would ask, the city manager, about, about funding. I'll be honest with you, the city has kind of put out discretionary money and said, people of Cambridge, come in and tell us how to spend the money. I think it would be hard to get this lighting committee to tell the city to earmark some of that discretionary money to solve lighting problems, So, I guess that's a long-winded answer to the 5 years to say, it would be, if you can't force them, can we somehow create an incentive program that makes it a reasonable thing for people to do it, even if they don't want to?
I think it's something that, if people feel strongly about it from the task force, that we should include in the report, that basically the request that some sort of an incentive program be reviewed and looked at. It's not something obviously that we can put directly in the ordinance itself, but
I think the incentive program is great for small business owners. I don't think it necessarily is going to help all those people who are, oppressed by the big lights on top of building apartments or anything. So I really think this may be not the right time, but I would like to have a further discussion about the possibilities for having short-term relief for predominantly residential situations in which really would like to move on to worry about the time, and there's something that I think is really important to discuss. If we can-
First, though, before we, is there anybody else that had comments about 5 years?
I just want to agree with Carol Lynn. That's the fundamental defect here is that there's the low density residential areas, and then which is LZ2, and then there's LZ3. They're very, very different. People are building giant buildings in LZ3, and they're going to produce way more lumens than we ever will in two-family houses. So, and it's something Glenn tried to convince me of years ago when I was presenting to a community group, is that it's two different problems, it's two different ordinances, it's just two different things. Because what a homeowner can do and afford to do and can understand to do, and the impact of 5 years of a light shining on you is so very different in the low-density residential neighborhood than it is in Kendall Square. It's just two different planets. And for someone to be losing sleep for 5 years is sort of unconscionable.
So what are you recommending? I'm just trying to get to are you talking obviously less than 5 years? I don't think that we would be comfortable recommending immediate, because that's just too much of a financial burden on everybody. But so I'm just asking what your opinion is on, other than 5 years, what would it be?
If your argument for 5 years is massive commercial leases by Biogen, that's a lighting zone 3 problem. Everywhere else it's a different problem. There should be 2 parts of this ordinance. It should be the part for normal models and the part for everybody else for the area.
So what would the phase-in periods be for those?
I don't actually think you should have a phase-in period for residential areas, because those lights wouldn't be in compliance today. They're illegal now, and what you're doing is legalizing illegal lights, which I think is a bad thing. So I think it's unnecessary. I think those 4 fixes cover 99% of the lights that she suggested. It's a tiny problem that once you add in lighting zone 3, it becomes an enormously expensive problem.
Well, maybe the thing to do is to have the zoning article 7.2 continue to apply to the lucky people who live in A, B, C, and C1. And Ranji can do his best to enforce that. But for all the people who live in zoning areas 2 throughout the city, there ought to be this alternative that within 6 months or a year, they are asked to, make the small changes that would make life a lot better for their neighboring properties. I have no problem with 5 years for true commercial big capital installations like in LZ3 and other places where it would really be a very big deal.
I think you should consider the legal department, and because we know the billboard ordinance we had, signs, there was a time limit for them to, certain years they had to remove it, but they challenged it and they won. So we cannot, billboards are still there, we cannot ask them to remove it. Ordinance says from certain years you remove the billboard, then you go through. So I think the legal department has to be on that.
Okay, so we'll talk to them and we'll get back to the next one.
Because this is part of a building which is non-conforming object, and if it's like
So-
go through.
In other words, some things are just grandfathered forever, and you can change the law all you want. The point of the municipal ordinance was that we could get around
I don't know.
grandfathering.
I'm sorry?
The point of this committee was to have a municipal ordinance to get around this exact case, which is that something already exists, and we're going to change the law and say you have to take it down, whether it's take it down today or take it down in 5 years. He's saying, even though it was 5 years, they didn't have to take it down. So just said.
We can look at the ordinance and see what the board says. If it's after 2 years, some sort of date you are removed. We try to enforce it, there is a court and that's why I said we should consult our legal department.
Yeah.
on that for it.
I'm worried about time, and I want to have a chance to talk about the performance and prescriptive standards if possible.
Well, that's the next 8 lux level in performance. Some people said they were concerned that it was too high, and which is one version of the performance standard that you can choose is either 8 lux or the LEED light pollution credit. And so, if you want to go ahead and
I need to use the PowerPoint because I have the examples shown for it. It's too complicated for me to do without these.
what?
No, I can't. You'll have to go screw it. Hi, David.
Hey, you jumped out of the phone and appeared. He's a wizard.
Jeff, are you still there? Sorry.
Probably on mute.
Yeah.
You must have been there.
Yeah, I'm still here. I just have my phone on mute.
Sure,
I'm just
that's
here to help if there's any questions or
Yep.
anything that comes up. So
Great.
I'll just be on mute and let somebody directly ask me something.
Okay, thank you.
Can we turn off sunlight? Because I did this in the dark.
Yes, you can. Let's see, so that's good. That'll work.
Okay. I'm going to skip the preamble, except to say that I was very glad, by the way, that when Lisa joined this process, because she's been very responsive in answering questions, and I know that you have a great reputation for guiding negotiations through to conclusion. So I just hope you have the fortitude to stay with us through these additional adjustments as we try to make this really good. I've spent more than 60 hours in the past week on my own dime, basically reviewing the draft ordinance, the model lighting ordinance, the LEED lighting pollution credit, the Navy's pattern outdoor lighting code version 2.0 from 2010, materials for manufacturers and lighting designers and researchers. And I've also looked at the ordinances in more than 2 dozen municipalities. I've kind of meet with Lisa and Chris to understand better what community development is trying to accomplish. I've spoken with some of my colleagues on this task force and several of the concerned parties here in attendance. I've even prepared a detailed markup in audience, which I'm sure you'll be really happy to get it rolled up. So what I want to focus on now are just some curious inconsistencies in this order, and I'm going to start with the 8 lux thing because that was the one that really leapt out at me. In the alternative performance standards, in this draft ordinance, a developer or property owner can choose to submit a plan in alignment with the LEED light pollution credit guidelines. These are very clear and very precise. Or they are allowed to submit a plan that indicates that there will be no more than 8 lux emitted at the property line 5 feet and above. Now, the reason that this is an inconsistency, and I think a big one, is that this 8 lux figure has been derived from the model lighting ordinance. But in the model lighting ordinance, this table only applies to non-residential areas. And the 8 lux value only applies to commercial and industrial zones, zone 3, which on the Cambridge Light Zone map are only the smaller, darker areas. But this draft ordinance has 8 lux for the entire city, whereas in the model lighting ordinance, a limit of 3 lux at the property line for all zone 2 areas, the lighter areas that make up the majority of our city. You can see that here. In truth, the more appropriate alternative choice for the alternative performance standards, since it is substituting for the LEED standards, should be the LEED lighting pollution credit standard for trespass at the property boundaries, and that figure is 2 lux for zone 3 and 1 lux for zone 2. Here's the LEED statement about zone 3. So no illuminance over 2.2 horizontal vertical foot candles or 2 vertical lux at the lead property boundary. And for zone 2, no more than 1 vertical lux at the lead property boundary. So that's a kind of very confusing mishmash. I'm going to stay on this mishmash of things. If we want to be consistent in the alternative performance standards, we should be using the lead standards for lux at the boundaries, 1 and 2, and divided between these 2 different districts, commercial and mostly residential. Or if we really want to stick to the model lighting ordinances, which is only intended for commercial properties, that would at least go down to 3, and it would not be 8. So that's the first point I want to make about lux.
Can we stay on that point and then just have that discussion before we move on? Because I don't want to lose that.
Okay, I also want to make the point that I think many people who I've talked to are under the impression that the 8 lux prescribes to all properties in the city. And that in fact, Ron Jeaton's folks are going to be going out at night with light meters and measuring whether it's 8 lux at the boundary. And in the way the ordinance is written, that is not the case. That only applies to organizations that have chosen to submit a lighting plan in advance of constructing their property, their buildings, and designing their lighting plan. So in fact, this lux standard right now only applies to people planning future projects, and it is not used in deciding whether people in all these big groups, the yellow areas, have too much light trespass on their property.
Currently.
Instead, for the prescriptive method, Ranjit has to go and look at the power of the light bulb and the shielding of the light bulb and directionality. So I'm saying 2 things here. I'm saying that A, for all those situations in which people are applying for permits for future installations and future buildings, the standard for lux at the boundary should be consistent with the side-by-side standard that's being put forth, the lead standard, which is 3, which is 2 for commercial areas. And that it should be 1 for these residential areas. And I do think that people living in the zone 2 areas should be able to check whether lighting on an abutter's property is in conformance by using a lux meter to measure the 1 lux at the property line.
So just going back and clarifying, what we're saying with performance method after 5 years, after the effective date, is that even if it's an existing structure, they would still have to file a lighting plan. They would have to choose if they're going to follow the prescriptive method or the lead performance option or the 8 lux at the property line performance option, if it's existing or if it's in the future. So they would still have to choose which one they're following and submit a lighting plan for
Under the
that
performance standard.
under the performance standard.
Okay. Yeah, I take that clarification. So I want to know, why are we allowing 8 lux, which is 8 full moons of light, coming into an abutting neighbor's window, bedroom window, where their child might be sleeping, in a non-commercial zone 2 area?
This is where the task force has to give me their opinions. And I do apologize because I've not been to all the meetings, so I'm not sure where, and I sincerely apologize because I don't know where, we came up with the differential. I think it was more of a creative standard between the 8 lux and the lead light pollution credit. I don't know that. I need you all to tell me that and how you feel about that. And you've obviously clearly told me how you feel about that. But I need the other task force member opinions on that.
Well, originally, just for clarification, originally when we were talking about this last August, it was only going to be for the areas that are designated
you know, in that 8 lux version, you know, or actually it would be 8 lux and 3 lux, right? So we'd have lighting zone 2, 3 lux, lighting zone 3.
That's
lux.
the model lighting ordinance standard for commercial areas.
And for urban, I mean, it's also urban.
Yes,
It's urban
yes,
residential.
No,
residential.
it's anything zone 3 and up.
Right, but zone 2 would be 3 lux and that's,
Yes.
right, urban
For
residential.
model lighting, yes.
Right, so rather than, I mean, I would imagine, and again, please jump in, because, you know, I am not the lighting expert here, but rather than making the differentiation, wouldn't you just go with the lead light pollution credit
Yeah.
and just eliminate the 8 lux standard totally? I mean, I don't know, I'm asking the question.
I just want to say that Charlie came up with this idea of saying, why don't we just require all big developments in zone 3 areas? We're talking about, I think your figure was 10,000 square feet or more, which are already going to be hiring lighting designers and spend lots of money and so forth. Why don't we just require them all to do the lead lux, the lead light pollution credit? Because, like, I'm sure that, you know, Forest City and, you know, David Chalinsky and people who are, you know, architects and developers for these areas would be very happy to have a sensible set of standards that are well vetted, beautifully described, and they cannot wonder what's going to happen when we go submit this thing. They can just do what they would have to do for the certification, and it's done.
I mean, I'm not an architect or a developer, so I don't know if eliminating the first option, I mean, you know, can you talk to that? I mean, or does it make a difference? Or, I mean, most of the buildings are they following the light pollution
Well,
credit
I
anyway?
think certainly, you know, whatever I say, the buildings in Kendall Square, buildings of that nature, everybody, we're required to go through lead process anyway for other Cambridge ordinance uses.
Right.
You know, there are little spots on the blue on this map that aren't in Kendall Square, and where you might well have, you know, folks who aren't necessarily, you know, delving into standards. I think the lead approach, I think there's pretty good consensus. The lead approach is a very workable standard to, you know, to suggest.
Yeah. Is there any reason that people feel that we should hold on to the 8 lux option under the performance standard? And I'm looking at you too, because you're the expert, and I just don't know, and so I'm really asking sincerely.
The lines are in different places. That's one of the reasons why I like the differences.
Say that again?
The lines are in different places for the lead and for the 8 lux for some areas, for a street side and in some adjacent side lots. And actually, I don't, whether it's 8 lux or 3 lux, it's both are fine. Going with the lead is fine from a technical standpoint. But just, you know how sensitive some of these lines are.
Yeah.
If you're 17 feet away from a structure, because I actually did some lighting calcs, if you're 17 away from a structure, you'll get 8 lux. If you go to 21 feet, so you back up 4 feet,
Yeah.
you're at less than 3 lux. So
Yeah,
it's
and
not a very,
square the distance.
but it's can be even less than, so it's
Yeah.
so that it's not that large. But typically for the lead light pollution credit, when people try to get it, they just go with bug ratings.
Yeah, they use the bug ratings, which Jeff gave us a whole presentation about last time.
Yeah, so
And I want to
that's,
get to that because that's missing here.
they'll actually, to meet the lead
Yeah.
credit, they'll just go with a bug rated fixture.
Just they go with that lead option, they have that option anyway.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
not
that's-
specifically
that's-
written out.
That's
Yes,
that's in the
specifically
lead
on the
option.
I mean, the only reason I thought we might want to keep the 8 lux, but put it down to the 1 to 3 range, was A, for any really small businesses that happen to be stuck in these
Little blue
areas,
businesses.
or little bitty businesses, or because it would also cross the board and apply to prescriptive and help with enforcing against light trespass.
I think we could certainly live with a lower level than 8.
So I guess I'm asking you all what you want to do with this 8 lux standard then, based on this conversation. What should they add it to be?
I would like to change it to be in conformance with the lead.
With the LZ2 and the LZ3?
With the lead LZ2 and LZ3. The thing is, I don't see in the ordinance any reference to these two zones.
We're going to actually put it in writing, and that will come in the next
Okay.
draft. Legal's working on it, but it has to be in writing.
Okay, that's
They're not going to
because
reference a map.
That pertains to my next suggestion.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess, and this is a question for future, because what we were proposing as well for LEED is that we take the most recent version, and so that can change over time.
Yes.
So
Lead, yeah.
LEED can. So with lighting zones, I mean, the reference to lighting zones may be completely moot at some point. So it would, applying where LEED automatically looks at lighting zones,
Yeah.
and if people follow the lead and we put in the ordinance, follow lead,
Yeah.
and if it automatically refers to it there,
Yeah.
that's why we didn't refer to it in the ordinance, because otherwise there's no reason to put lighting zones.
And
in
I
the
believe the lead also would take care of 1A, which is the requirement that all the lighting be fully shielded. In other words, no lighting above the 90-degree plane of the luminaire, am I right? Pretty sure it does. Yeah, absolutely, certain because it has the bump rating and all of that.
Right.
Could I
They
make
use their-
one comment on the point you just made?
Yeah.
Relative to the sort of the most recent version of LEED.
Yeah.
The folks who update LEED from time to time
Mhm.
are updating it under the assumption that it's a voluntary program.
Yeah.
And that this is one point of 70 or 80 possible points that people can choose to use.
Yeah,
They're not updating it with the idea that they're writing code for the city of Cambridge.
right, good point.
And nor does, I don't think, Cambridge necessarily going to put itself in the position of letting a bunch of volunteers at USGBC
Dictating.
dictate its ordinances.
Right.
So I was actually, Charlie and I were chatting before the meeting about this point, and we sort of thought, we made a specific reference to the current version 4, which is the version that is just coming into being
that's
now.
true.
And then,
It's definitely right.
Yeah.
and then,
I
you know,
get it.
we could do that. Charlie was expressing a concern that, you know, once it's cast in stone,
Right,
the city never updates.
right.
You know, there could be a reference to updating the future versions, provided such versions are, you know, certified as appropriate by, you know, the Commissioner of Exceptional Services or something, and there would need to be a process to go through to make sure that that is rational.
Okay.
But we ought to be writing to the standard that we're all talking about and understanding.
Now, one potential loophole is, my understanding is that as the ordinance is written, folks are supposed to write this lighting plan saying that they have met the lead light pollution credit and sign an affidavit saying that's what they're doing and give it to someone at Ranjit's office who files it in the
When they pull the
somewhere.
electrical permit. And
Yeah.
I mean, even though they wouldn't be
Yeah.
filing a lighting plan at a prescriptive standard, they would also have to sign the affidavit when they pull the electrical.
Right, but they haven't actually gotten it, they're not forced to get the accreditation from the lead organization.
Correct.
Which troubles me a little bit, because who on Ranjit's staff is going to have the time, or is there any mechanism for them to go out after the thing is built or installed and see whether they follow the plan that they described and conform to it, and since they never even applied for the pollution credit in all likelihood.
Well, but there are plenty of buildings that will design to a LEED standard as a standard,
Okay.
but it costs a lot of money to
Yeah,
do all the work to go get certified.
yeah,
And USGBC doesn't certify on one point.
Right.
They'll certify you know, silver, gold, platinum, based on
All the
a
systems.
huge
in the
quantity of information
Right.
that has to be provided.
building. Right.
So
Yeah.
even the city's sustainability standards say, you know, in certain areas you've got to design to a LEED silver standard or design to a LEED gold standard. And we have to go through the checklist and demonstrate that we've done that. It doesn't require certification, and I think that would be a burdensome.
Well, I mean, that's similar to building code practices in general. If you're submitting lighting plans, you're submitting construction documents, these are all things that are being reviewed by building inspectors with the knowledge and the expertise that can catch these things. And those individuals that would be reviewing the lighting plan would be brought up to the technical requirements for being able to
Yeah,
review
I'm
that.
assuming we
So-
have that training for
Right,
staff.
so that would go part and parcel with everything else that's being signed off by a registered architect or professional engineer that's stating
This
by their
complies.
authority, by their license,
By
that,
their license.
that this is accurate and this is what's going to take place, because that's taking place right now, that's happening right now throughout the city, and throughout the city.
Okay, so if we are almost at consensus of that, I just want to get this other big thing about the prescriptive standards on the table in this meeting, because I'm conscious of the time, there are people who want to talk, and I put a lot of effort into
I just had one question. So are we crossing out the whole alternative?
No,
No, we're leaving it, but we're tying it to,
we're saying
So-
they
so-
have to use the LEED pollution credit guidelines.
according to the geography specified by the map.
2 or 1.
In zone 3.
Right.
In zone 3, or in any big project of over 10,000 feet, because what if there's an apartment building, like a big, huge apartment building going up on Mass Ave or something? Would it have to come? That's why I wonder whether we need to specify a minimum square footage besides just the zone 3.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we got I think that we need to definitely find out from each of the committee members as far as what
Yeah.
is felt about that, because get clarification on the.
Yeah, I need clarification, I think today, like, is 10,000 too small, is it too big? I mean, is everybody okay with 10,000 square feet being the cutoff? And so we're talking about LZ2 being 3 lots and LZ3 being 8 lots.
No. LZ1 is 1 lot, LZ2 is 1 lot, so
One lot.
LZ3 is 2 lots.
Okay.
So what Carolyn is proposing is that we're completely getting rid of the model lighting ordinance performance standard and only using the LEED performance standard.
Okay,
Only for the alternative performance, I'm just trying to make the 2 alternatives be consistent in that category, rather than wildly inconsistent.
and then,
Okay, let's go through the performance standards, once you finish your comments on it.
and you're suggesting the performance standard be required for any property in LZ3?
In LZ3,
Over.
or over, yes. In
Over.
LZ3 or anywhere over 10,000 feet, but I
So
have
let's go
to
with
defer to
10,000.
the developer.
Yeah, let's talk to 10,000 for just a second.
Yeah.
The city is using 10,000 in other places.
Okay.
Let me just suggest. And it's a little bit of a, we're picking it out of the air a little bit. However, we're not really, because the city, affordability, there's a series of things in the parking regulations. When you get above 10,000, retail is required to have parking. If it's under 10,000, they consider it a neighborhood building, and it doesn't. I mean, the 10,000 is not a weird number. It's actually used in numerous places in the ordinance to be the next thing, whatever that next thing is. So, for want of, is 12 the right number? Is 18 the right number?
What's the current threshold for a large project, special permit review?
Can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah, Jeff?
So, just to throw something out there, we're talking about, I have been following every word of the conversation, I can't hear it all that well, but it sounds like we're talking about setting a threshold where you'd be required to meet the LEED light pollution credit. Is that the gist of the discussion?
Correct. In lighting zone 3, in lighting zone 3.
No, not as part of, not as part of the, not as part of, we're getting rid of 8 lots.
Right.
We're replacing the 8 lots portion with a suggestion, a requirement, for LZ2 and LZ3, of 1 lots and 3 lots respectively. And in LZ3,
1 and 2.
1 and 2, I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to make a suggestion, if you're put something out there, if you're talking about design threshold, which is that we currently require LEED review
Right.
and LEED standards to be met for buildings that are 25,000 square feet or more, and there's going to be some proposed standards to be met for buildings
Right.
You want this, you have to be
So,
specific to
and
that.
I don't think it's a problem to have over 25,000 have to conform to the whole new process, and having anything over 10,000 specifically conform to the pollution credit.
So again, just for, like, maybe I'm the only one thinking about this. For the performance method, in essence, for lighting zone 3, what is being proposed is that we're striking 8 lots, period, that performance option, and only going with the lead option.
And I think I own that for other projects more than 10,000 square feet in the city, they would also be asked to go with the lead light pollution credit, regardless of zone.
Anybody else have comments on that?
Okay, so what, everybody LZ3 or just
About 10 is what's been.
above? Well, that's LZ2. Everywhere in the city is 2 or 3, right?
2 or 3?
Yeah.
So everybody above 10,000 square feet. And then LZ3 is just everybody.
Well, again, I think that's what we need to
Yeah.
get a consensus on, because so we're requiring for anybody in LZ3, anybody in that blue area that's on the map, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, anybody in LZ3 would be required to follow LEED performance. They couldn't choose a prescriptive method, they would be required to follow the LEED performance.
No.
The prescriptive method, this was always an alternative to
Right.
prescriptive.
Right.
You can do the prescriptive,
Yep,
or you can do the performance. And the performance had 2 options
correct.
Right.
originally.
Yep.
One was 8 lux,
Mhm.
And the other is
and
the
the other
light
was,
pollution credit.
was the, well, yes, light
Yes.
pollution credit.
So-
What we're now suggesting is that we either get rid of or we reduce to 2 and 1, the first of those 2 alternatives, and we keep the lead light pollution credit as the
Yeah.
other alternative.
Yeah.
And I do think it makes sense to set, if 10,000 is the right number, I would apply it across the board, whichever district you're in.
Yeah,
So I'm sorry, and I really want to make sure we're getting it right, but we're striking 8 lots totally.
No, I think what we're saying is that you can choose either to conform with the LEED light pollution credit or the equivalent in lux at the boundary
Like
line
1 or 2.
with the full shielding. And so in other words, 1A and 1B together, but the 1B values would be 1 and 2
1 and 2.
rather than 8.
Unless
And
you're,
we're also
yeah.
saying that
If you're
for
over
proper,
10,000.
if you're over 10,000 feet anywhere in the city,
Mhm.
with your project that you're going to do, you must conform to the LEED light pollution standard.
I mean, just to make it simpler, it sounds like anything over 10,000 square feet, you're required to follow LEED. Anything under 10,000 square feet, you can either choose to follow a prescriptive method or the LEED performance method.
No,
No.
You always have the choice for the prescriptive methods.
Yes, you always have the choice between the prescriptive and the performance, but if you choose the performance, if you're over 10,000 square feet, you have to be in that,
in the LEED.
Yes.
You have to do that.
right,
I
in the
think
LEED
you
light
have it,
pollution
Lisa,
credit.
so,
Yes.
yeah. And I'll you have it, so I can send you a note.
And so then if you're under 10,000 feet, are you then, you still have the option of,
1 or 2
you still
lots.
have the option
Of 1 or 2
One or
of
two
performance
lots.
standards.
Plus,
Of either performance
Plus
standards
the
or
Well,
others.
prescriptive standards,
Yeah,
it's always there,
right,
for the 1 or 2 lux or the lead.
1 or
Right.
2 lots.
right, if you're under 10,000
Plus,
square feet.
it's 1 or 2 lots plus the full shielding for the LEED.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do apologize, I have to step out for just a second, but I also am cognizant of time because we have we have a half an hour left.
Can we be sure that I can do like about prescriptive?
Yeah, but I do have to step out for a second, I'm sorry.
Just making sure we've got clarification on for the lighting zone, looking at with the lighting zone of 1 or 2, dependent on lighting zone 2, the lighting zone 3. That, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is LEED. That is one of the options
That
under LEED.
is part of the LEED
And it's
standard.
what are the things that you have to do to get LEED, to follow the LEED credit? If you are following the calculation method, which is,
Chris, you can look this up online.
no, I know that, but what I'm saying
It's a
is
long
that
document.
it's the same.
With LEED, you can either do a vertical luminance value,
Right.
depending on what the zone,
Yep.
or you can use the bug rating,
Right.
depending on what zone it's in.
And so, Carolyn, what you're proposing is that you aren't allowed to use bug rating.
No, I'm not saying
So,
that.
so then, I guess my question is, what we're talking about is either you follow LEED, you can choose to follow LEED if your building is under 10,000 square feet,
Yes.
or you can follow the prescriptive standard.
No, or you can match the, at least by the total amount of lots at the boundary at 1 or 2, depending on your district, plus the full shielding requirement, which are paragraphs 1A, B, and there. No, it's already in there.
It's already in there, which makes it already LEED, is what I'm saying. There is no extra component.
But what I would suggest is you use the performance method as LEED. Don't worry about the square footage, don't worry about whatever number for an LZ3, the performance method is LEED.
Okay, I would respectfully disagree with that, because I feel like there are smaller businesses that can't hire, that could just go by the maximum limitation at the property line, and I feel that we should include larger projects in zone 2.
But
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to try to catch all the residential, this is mixed-use neighborhoods, we want to overburden neighbors who could just, grind on houses or see if they can
Yeah.
use the prescriptive.
They can use the node, they can use full shielding plus no more than 1 at the boundary.
Right, but for someone to do the analysis to determine they won't have any more than 1 or 2
Yeah.
bugs, it's gonna cost more money than it would take them to go to a catalog cut and pick out a bug rating of B1U0G1.
That would be great, and that would then be their lighting program.
So they can choose that.
So, that's what I'm saying,
I see.
even if you just use LEED, they're probably gonna go with the least expensive option, which is gonna be bug
Right.
rating.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would require.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're still getting at the same
education.
price, it
Okay.
just narrows it down to just
Okay.
need LEED.
Let's run this by after the meeting, the details. Okay, so,
So, Dan, the 10,000 applies to new building or existing buildings?
what?
Does the 10,000 apply
No, I
to new
think
buildings
what
or
we're saying
existing
is
buildings?
all new buildings that require permitting or all new lighting plans that require electrical permits over 10,000 feet would be asked to comply with the LEED light pollution credit or the alternative. No, they would, the LEED light pollution credit. And the existing ones would do it within 5 years.
Even if they renovate the entire 10,000 square feet.
Yeah,
See, here's an example.
yeah,
Even before the 5 years, in year 2,
yeah.
there's a building that's a 50,000 square foot
And
building
it's renovating half.
that it's going to get renovated.
Okay.
The building code catches a lot, it does a lot of catch up on
Okay.
things.
I'm really glad
when
you brought that up,
renovate a
David,
building.
because in the model lighting ordinance and in almost all lighting ordinances I looked at across the country, there's a provision that these things kick in, usually when more than 25% of the property is getting redeveloped.
Yeah, we should create a
So I
threshold.
don't know why we
Yeah.
left that out, but these are really standard things in
Yeah.
lighting
That's a
ordinances
good
across
thing.
the country.
Makes it clearer for
Yes.
them about when do we worry about it, when do we
Yes.
not worry about it.
Yes, and it means that they don't do something within 3 years and then say, oh, 5 years, ooh, yeah.
So right now we have, for sprinklers, there's 50% space. If you renovate more than 50% space, there are quite a few sprinklers.
Right.
Should we be trying to match that?
Well, I would hope we go down to 25%, because that is more standard across the country.
But, okay, just real quick on this. So 25% renovation. I mean, what we were saying is that whenever you're renovating, whenever you're putting in any new, with the effective date of this, that's when you have to be compliant. That's when you have to be
So
compliant.
any new lighting?
So any new lighting or any renovated.
But what
Any-
constitutes, I mean, if you're just doing a tenant fit up
is that if you're doing an interior fit out of 25% or more,
No, I don't think so, and don't quote me on this, because I think we have to look at the way the model light ordinance and these other communities do this, because I'm not sure
okay.
about how they define that
Yeah,
percentage.
because we're basically saying whenever you change your light fixture, you have to come to immediate compliance.
Yes.
So we're not even saying when you do a 25% renovation,
Right.
like if you change that light fixture,
Right.
it's got to be
Right.
upgraded
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what's in the proposed draft right now.
right now, yeah.
Can I just touch briefly on the prescriptive standards, because that's the whole other thing, so we don't mess with it all. So I saw the same kind of confusion between different standards in the ordinance prescriptive standards. I started out by corresponding with Lisa about the equivalencies for the lumens and the wattage, but this table E that's in the draft ordinance prescriptive standards is largely derived, as Lisa pointed out, from the model ordinance table G. But in the model ordinance, this table is reserved for residential properties alone, not commercial. And in
So yeah, we
addition,
want the lower lighting levels than LV2 as opposed to
well,
LV2.
it's more than that, because in addition, the assumption in the model lighting ordinance is that these limits are, for a house. And they assume basically one luminaire at an entryway, one luminaire at the shed door, one luminaire on the driveway, and so forth. So there's no, and it's specific, so there's no question about how many of these things you could have lining your front yard. So it also, in the model lighting ordinance, it ensures that even in residence, there's this principle. First of all, it says that you can only have one partly shielded or unshielded luminaire at the front entry, whereas we have no limit on the numbers of them. And then it also ensures that there's no light trespass on neighboring properties by including that wording so that no direct glare is visible from adjacent properties. But more than this, the model lighting ordinance and most of the other municipal lighting ordinances I looked at make a distinction between residential and commercial properties in their prescriptive standards. And Jeff, you know this because you showed us all of this. But in other words, in the model lighting ordinance, and this is from page 19, the first thing they require commercial properties to do is to limit the total amount of flux or illumination on the entire property using a formula like total lumens per square foot. And then they require that property not only that they limit light spill above the horizontal line of the fixture, but also that they limit emissions at the upper side angles. That's that colorful bug rating system that Jeff showed us in his slideshow last week. So the issue on the table, it's been on the table, Peter Hawkins has mentioned it, and many others have pointed out that table F allows unlimited numbers of lights at 1,050 lumens at different spaces between buildings up to 12 feet high, as long as they are shielded from upglow, is sourced from what I believe is a misunderstanding of the model lighting ordinance and its distinction between residential and commercial properties or zones. And the MLO is also very careful to indicate that this shielded direction flow flood lighting should be aimed so glare is not visible from adjacent properties. So I think that since we've gone to the trouble of dividing Cambridge into two lighting zones, we ought to stick with this distinction between prescriptive standards for primarily commercial areas and primarily residential areas. That I think bears some discussion I'm looking at. I'm just going to mention two quick things now that are just beyond this. And one of them is under light color. We've already talked about light color. You've already mentioned that the color rendering index is highly faulty standard. It's not included on lighting packages. the technical discussions online are with all the problems with it. And I really think we should just drop that from being in the ordinance at all, any mention of the color rendering index. If it's included in the lead pollution light credit, okay, fine, they have a way of measuring it. But it's a moving target.
Does anybody have any, just so we can,
I think you already have that in your draft.
Yeah,
you want to just
You
delete
already made
that
that
from the...
change.
yeah, just delete it. And then the other thing,
No, we haven't taken it out.
We put it strictly in the
The performance standard, but if you all feel that it should just be deleted overall, then we can do that.
and number 2 is about the seasonal and temporary lighting. I don't know why the two are combined here, because they seem like very different things to me, but I don't think that's a good idea. The current standard in Cambridge limits seasonal lighting to 1 month. This draft says that anyone can put up 2 months of temporary lighting for any reason, take it down for 30 days, then put up more temporary lighting or holiday of some type lighting for 60 days, take it down for 30 days, and so on, giving property owners the option of having temporary or seasonal lighting for 8 months out of a 12-month year. Most of the other ordinances I looked at limit seasonal lighting to a period between mid-November and mid-January, the darkest time of the year, when various cultures celebrate in various ways the getting through the winter. And many of them follow the model lighting ordinance's prescription that individual lamps and seasonal and temporary lightings have to be less than 70 lumens each, which is about 10 watts each. So that's 2 additional comments.
Just to go back to the prescriptive standard, I mean, I'm curious of other people's opinions about breaking it out into, first of all, differentiating between LZ2 and LZ3 for the prescriptive standard, and then using the lumen levels that you suggested for those two, so differentiating between residential and commercial. How people feel about it.
I think what I'm saying is in some ordinances it was much clearer because they said you can't have any trespass of this amount of lumens except if it's an unshielded equivalent 40 watt or 25 watt bulb and limit the number of them. So,
Right, I mean, with that though, that again, I think that the concern there is that there is no basis for determining the number of fixtures to do, to limit. So there is no reasoning as far as, is it 5, is it 6, how many fixtures are we talking about? It's an arbitrary number.
Under 10,
Under 10,
it
it's,
depends on how far your property is set back, how many you might need to light your walkway.
Exactly.
So, I don't like limiting the number of fixtures, because we have so many different property types in Cambridge. So then how do we get to the issue that you're talking about?
So, right, but the problem that many people were raising was in this table, basically you could say, well, I would like to have a wall of, 50 watt light bulbs, a foot from my front property line, on 12-foot poles.
Right.
well, again, it's dependent on within that standard, the location, the use of the fixture, and the shielding. Shielding is identified what is allowed, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
Yeah.
So the only unshielded fixtures total would be either 315 or 630 lumen. That's the total unshielded.
Right, but it
Fixtures
doesn't
that would
say
be allowed.
how many of those you're allowed to have and where
Correct.
on your property.
Correct.
Right, and I think we're not going to get to it by trying to limit the number of fixtures, because again, we're just not going to get to it. And it's really hard, right, because,
I agree.
you have a speed limit, but that doesn't mean everybody is going to follow. You're going to have, some of those people that are going to put that, 50 pocket lights up, or,
Agreed.
Similar.
I think the
It's hard to
purpose
get
of
to what you're trying to do.
I think what you guys were trying to achieve was, let's say I'm very limited income and I've lived in this house for 50 years and I have, I just don't have a fixture on my front porch. I screw a light bulb in and it's bare naked.
Yeah.
We just want to say, hey, would you screw a 40 watt light bulb rather than a 100 watt light bulb in there?
But that's what we're saying.
I know, but the problem is that you're trying to make this table work for that circumstance as well as all commercial and areas of the city, the entire city.
Yes.
And that a business could take that and mean, well, I'm going to line the front property of my business with a row of 100 40-watt lights on 12-foot poles. And a lot of the other ordinances limit this by either having a spacing requirement between fixtures or a minimum kind of some kind of formula like that, or maximum number per square area. But you see, the 12-foot, at first I thought 12 feet high, that's really great, that's lower, and we've seen so many that are high up on buildings, but then I realized, and I found this in the Navy's model ordinance discussion in the lighting code, that can be counterproductive, because someone could say, I want to save money, I want to have 12-foot poles, but I want as few as possible. Therefore, I want the light coming out of the poles to be as horizontal as possible, to cover as wide an area as possible. And that's a recipe for glare.
Well, I guess I'll let Parsons also chime in on that one as far as, is that possible with, how do you, because it's unshielded fixture versus a shielded fixture is what that comes down to.
Right. I guess it would be possible for someone to take, in the front of the house, they could take a whole bunch of 40-watt bulbs and put them across the front of the house. It's difficult to put a distance between them, either because a typical in installation like this would be wall sconces on each side of the door.
Exactly.
So it's 3 feet apart. So you
Right.
make 3 foot your spacing maximum,
Right.
because you wouldn't want that.
Right.
If they carried it down the whole length of the house. The other problem with
But you could do total lumens on the porch.
but it may not be a porch.
But it's a big
How wide is the house?
How far away are
It could
they
be a
from the
square,
street front?
On our walking tour, some people have really big porches and they have
And what we
four or
want,
five.
and
They
it's
were actually
true.
okay. Yeah, because
Is the house
porches.
built right up to the sidewalk?
I
Is
know.
it back? Do they need, more lumens, less
I know.
lumens? It's a really difficult issue.
I
We're
know.
talking about 40-watt light bulbs?
Well, the
Or
630 is
not
more like
very
a 50
threatening.
watt.
Versus
630, again, it depends, because we can keep going back and forth on, 630.
Let's not-
Yeah, it's, or 315, those are the two different types of.
Just front of the house and side of the house.
So, I would be happier with this if we had the definition of fully shielded the way that some ordinances did, which is that they specifically say that they're shielded in a way that doesn't cause trespass across the property boundary.
So if we add that language.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you, I have some definitions. that-
Well, I just want to have a little bit of time for other members of the
Yeah.
task force to speak, and then members of the public as well.
And I think we do find that way. Fully shielded light fixture. I think it's different.
No, it's shielded so that nothing goes above 90 degrees at the lowest part of the luminaire. It doesn't have anything like bug, and it doesn't have anything about, see, if you have a 12-foot
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
going
yeah,
horizontal, that
yeah.
can go into your neighbor's first floor bedroom
Any
window.
suggestion of how to update that?
Yeah, what it would be is that you do not want to be able to see any of the light emitting element from where you are.
Exactly.
We can modify that.
Which is what we have in 720.
Okay, Sharon, we're making some progress here.
No,
You're
well,
doing it, you're doing it, doing great.
I think that in the interest of time, so that we have a chance to hear from people, because we have a lot of things that we have to update, and that it's going to take legal a few weeks for us to turn this around, so I think that we're in a good place that maybe the 24th meeting isn't necessary, because I need to take this to legal and give them a chance to turn this around and give you guys some substantive changes.
Does it make sense when you crafted something,
Yeah,
circulate it
yes,
with the understanding that it hasn't been reviewed by legal
yes,
and it's a draft,
yes.
but rather than peeking it all the way through that process and
And then finding out that I
here-
misheard you.
and then- Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Good idea.
I mean, I think part of the concern about the process that we've had is that it's been a little too much things go into a black hole and they come out 3 months later and you get a few hours to read them.
Yeah, so
Or
I
if
think,
it was- if it was more of an interactive process.
yeah, so I think what I'll do is we'll go step back and with Parsons for and take your changes, and then we'll send out the new draft to you, make sure that we've got everything.
There's one other thing, because I feel guilty because there's a couple of people who come to every meeting here and talked about interior lighting that acts like exterior lighting. And I was glad to see that building envelope was used in the definition of whatever it is, structure, because that indicates that even floor levels in parking garages whose lights are too bright and come out of the sides, open sides, would be covered. But I'm just wondering, I've seen some ordinances where they define outdoor and exterior light as light that lights up the exterior and outdoor, regardless of whether it's inside or outside. And, you know, some people like their landscaping from the interior picture. So I just want to throw that out as a possible thing to
Can
investigate.
you send me a copy of the definition? Does anybody else have any
I was
comments?
just going to say, Ranjit and I went near Walden Park, right? It was the assisted living people who had the row of, I don't know, probably 100-watt light bulbs all along the back. It was, and Ranjit asked me, they unscrewed half of them, but it's not a theoretical exercise. This actually does happen here in Cambridge right now. And they were all unshielded, and it was stunningly bright. And so I don't think you can sweep that under the rug. If you have to do LZ2, LZ3, if you have to do, she had that example where they say you can have one over for each entry, or this, that, or the other thing. That's a problem that has to be solved. Or, you know, I can't, it's inconceivable to support it. I can't solve that problem.
Can I ask you a stupid question on that issue? These guys. Isn't it, if we have a porch that we walk by, it had 3 small light bulbs on it, it was good. If they had put, and it has a certain foot candle maximum, that they have a foot candle number that creates. If that person came in and put 8 of those same small wattage bulbs, right? The illumination on that porch would be, right, higher foot candles. Can we manage this by managing the foot candles?
You mean the total luminance?
No, you
Per area?
Managing the
Square.
light level.
The light level produced by small fixtures, but too many of them.
It goes back to the fundamental premise of the prescriptive method is that it's easy to comply with. It's like, here's the guidelines, you follow the directions, and if you follow the directions, everything is fine. You don't have to do anything. And that's the and what we have currently is that if you can see the light bulb, it's glare, because glare is the most bothersome. You can have quite a lot of light right now, but you can't have the really annoying light. So I'm not sure you can resolve this in a way that a homeowner with a front porch can understand. You can't go to a homeowner and say lumens and you know, LEDs and you know, some other buzzwords, and then say go on and buy a light meter, or have your electrician get a light meter. The electrician's not going to be there at night.
Yes, heard everything you said. And isn't this issue when the person who lives across the street or next door to that person says, "This is killing me.
Yes.
Dad, look at all that crazy lighting
Yes.
over there."
If you didn't think.
I want his people to be able to, he does have a light meter. I want him to go over
Not
to
yet.
this guy.
Sorry.
We're going to get him. But I want him to be able to go onto this guy's porch and go, "Hey, pal, you got too many." It may have been difficult for that person to have gotten it right. I'm not disagreeing, because how do you ask a homeowner to be that smart? But from an enforcement standpoint, use your head. If the guy has too many lights on his porch, at least he can say, "Look, you don't meet the standard. You got too many lights on your porch."
Or you could change the bulbs.
Or change your bulbs.
And they're
Leave
probably
the
quite
six,
pretty.
leave the 6 things and change them back to 30 watts.
Yeah.
You'll get back, you're good on the meter, good, have a nice holiday,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, at least it would give him an ability to do something, and the neighbor the ability to say, that's crazy, right? Because telling somebody every 6 feet is goofy. I got a door, I can't
No,
put
no,
these
but
houses on
actually-
the side of my door.
But we tell them that on spacing your outlets in your home, it's every 10 feet. You know, this is common electrician knowledge base. It's like how far apart you can put things. This is not anything new for them.
I am happy because we're running out of time to meet in a small study group to hash out details like this with anyone who wants to do that. And I'm happy to spend more time sharing what I've learned because
We just have to avoid the perception that the task force is meeting without a public meeting being advertised.
I understand we can invite everyone, but I think there are some nitty-gritty details like this that are important. Like personally, I would rather that people had an interesting spray of little 10-watt lights. You know, I think that would be quite attractive than one 50-watt light bulb. But, you know, I think those are good points.
Speaking of time and schedule, Lisa, this isn't sort of unfolding the way that, you know, I was told. It's like, so this is, we're embarking on, what looks to me like a multi-month process here. Because it's going to take, you just said it's going to take some number of weeks to come up with a draft approved by legal, but, you know, in the interim, they can do those other things. And so then we'll sit down and there'll be a bunch of revisions and, honestly, we're looking, you know, if everything goes swimmingly, what are we looking at, 3 months, 4 months, or?
Well, I'm hoping to turn a draft around to you all by the beginning of next week.
Really?
Yes.
But,
Please
He's
extend
gonna work as hard as you
that. I put off so much, I have to get you some stuff.
Beginning of next week probably
The
is
thing
more
is,
like Wednesday, but
I have to say thank you because this is the most task force-like working group session we've had, I think. And I feel like we're making productive process and really bringing in the expertise we've done.
the reason that I hope to get the draft back to you all so quickly is because I want to have you all have time to read it and get back to me as soon as possible, because then it's got to go to legal and that's going to take a few weeks.
But I think, you know, we're on the cusp of maybe doing something really good for the city that's going to have repercussions for decades to come. Because all of these new development projects are getting launched everywhere.
But I don't want to lose momentum either, and
I don't
that's
want to
really
lose
where
momentum
I'm.
either, so let's agree
pushing
we're not
myself
going
to
to have
get that
another
back to
10
you.
months between meetings or 5
Now I
months.
said it and I'm on recording.
But why don't we say this is a better working style and we're on track here to work out some remaining details. But I'm not getting paid to do this as a consultant and I have a lot of work that I have to catch up on and so forth.
But I just say I'm feeling
Yeah.
comfortable getting the draft back to you as quickly as possible so you all
Okay.
have time to read it, because I
Okay.
realize that I'm the staff member.
Yes.
I think we would encourage
Yes.
getting feedback as
Yeah.
promptly as possible.
Yeah.
We'll all
And
do
just
our
bear
best.
with me with that kind of speed that there will probably be.
So when do
not
you
too
think
many glaring
the next meeting should be?
I think we had proposed the 24th, but I feel like that might be too soon now because of all the discussion we've had today. I believe the next meeting that we had proposed was that the majority of people could come to was October 7th.
Okay.
Um,
October 7th, I have to be in Washington.
Okay, so I'll send out a notification to see again, like where,
Yeah, I can't do that day.
okay, so we'll send out another notification to see early October when we can all meet.
October 6th, okay.
Okay.
but we don't envision getting to the end, there'd be another working meeting, I would guess.
I'm sorry.
And there's going to be some discussion on October 7th. That won't be the final draft. But
I mean, if
I'm
we
just
have,
being realistic.
I'm hoping that if we have
Very close.
a good discussion, between the draft that I send you all next week, and then, get those edits back, make those edits, and then send it to legal, You know, so that's where I have to kind of look at the dates a little bit, you know, that we would be able to then present you with a final draft, in theory. So, but I have to see how that timing works. I have to see that I'm making all the edits that you've all suggested tonight, because there are quite a few, you know, and make sure that we've heard everybody properly.
And in the spirit of moving with vigor,
Yes.
okay, but not doing anything we shouldn't be doing. Rash, thank you.
Bigger, but.
If there was an interest in this group, taking a look at that draft and yakking about it and getting you our feedback so that on the 7th, we're actually doing something meaningful like this. This was, you know, talked about some good stuff. How do we do that? Do we have to come here? How do we, can we meet together and review the draft? I was picking up on something you were saying about how we can't.
You mean
can't
on
do
our
something.
own without any?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the bottom.
Right, it's just that, yeah, like I can't have a meeting with,
Yeah.
you know, you as a group without making it, you know, publicly advertised.
You can.
Yes.
But I
Okay,
think
but if we
that-
don't invite you, we're good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just want to be clear. Can I invite him? Seriously? No, I'm actually not kidding. He's okay.
I think that.
He's a member of
No,
the
he's
committee.
available for phone
He's available for
consultation.
phone calls.
Okay, no, good, good.
I mean, I remember that the Central Square committee that I
Yeah.
was on met several times independently.
Yeah,
So,
okay, so we're good. It's just, you can't come.
And maybe we could call Jeff and Paul for consultation or a question.
So she's fine with me.
Should we,
I think public comment would be good right now, because it is on our agenda, and I do want to respect everybody who's been sitting with us for a few hours. So if there is public
The
comment.
rest of the public, I have a church board meeting I have to leave for, so. I'll be brief.
Yes, I had 7 points that I emailed you, Lisa, about things that I was concerned about. You've covered 6 of them.
Oh, good.
There are actually 2 more points that haven't been discussed at all. You did adjust the definition of architectural lighting, which I appreciate, which was secondary instead of incidental. And that's good. I think that the process of dealing with architectural lighting, defining it and then determining, if I understand what the ordinance says, it only relates the certificate of appropriateness process with the Cambridge Historical Commission only applies to buildings within historical and conservation districts. So there are buildings like the Leslie College Church restoration, which has just recently been completed on Mass Avenue, that has probably indirect lighting on most of it, but a very high level of reflected light over the white building, which, if you use Carol Lynn's definition of outdoor lighting to include reflected light, I think it would be in violation. And it seems like projects like that and projects like the Forest City Tower, there's a name for it at the end of Cambridge Street, which has 30-foot high lighted penthouses, ought to come under some design review, whether it's the Cambridge Historical Commission or a similar civic resident review group, because those are things that are either, if I understand the ordinance, either not possible by the prescriptive method, or, and if they're not in a historic district, simply aren't possible. So I guess the question is, what if somebody has a significant building outside of a historical district that they want to have something that doesn't fit the prescriptive limits? Is there any mechanism to allow that to happen?
Well, that would be through the administrative exemption process. They would basically ask for an administrative exemption.
But that's not a review of the design. I mean,
I just thought of something. Wouldn't a building of that size have to get through this LEED light pollution credit? And don't they pay a lot of attention to stuff like that.
but I don't think, and others can tell me, I don't think that the lead light pollution credit would necessarily put that into violation. I don't know, do you know?
I'd have to know what sort of lighting they did to it. I'm not quite clear on how they put this up.
Best way to look at it is after dark, go down Mass Avenue near Porter Square. and see.
Well, Peter Corkins actually sort of directly addressed that in saying that those are all going to be special permit invariably.
Yes.
And so the special permit design guidelines is silent on lighting. And so the design guidelines should be revised. And we should see that language.
And which is the case, both the Cambridge Historical Commission does not review any projects for lighting. They review it for lighting equipment. They actually have no interest in reviewing it for lighting.
Right.
So I would also suggest that in order to have the ordinance go forward as written, that you would have to have the city mandate that the Cambridge Historical Commission actually review for lighting per this ordinance, because they don't do it now and they're not interested in doing it.
This goes back to when you take it out of zoning, you get rid of the PCA, it goes back to having a lighting commission, just what you just started off saying, and which is what Quentin talked about last time. So you'd have people who were just doing lighting reviews, and it would give an appeal process to if they were denied by RG or they objected to any of its decisions, there'd be an appeal process that didn't involve going to court. That's how zoning works. And once you eliminate zoning, you don't have that. So maybe we just don't have
We did
that.
talk to legal about that, and they are adamantly opposed to having citizens adjudicating the rights of other citizens. And so we're not going to move forward on that. Any type of citizens.
And the Cambridge Historical Commission doesn't fall into that category.
No, they don't, but.
I don't have a problem with them doing it as long as they agree to do it.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
sure
don't we
they
need
will.
to know that they don't do it, if they're written into this ordinance?
I don't know that we can do that either. I have to,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, I
But
almost,
I did hear the point. I think
And then
the-
I think relative to that, it ought to be because if this is poured into their normal review process, then a COA is likely to get lost. So the question is, do they need a specific separate application and a separate certificate of appropriateness for this? It's an issue that I think needs to be addressed unless you want to just let things go the way they are and then fight it out in the courts if somebody's unhappy.
Hi, Tom Stolman, 19 Main Street. You actually addressed some very important things that I was concerned about, so that's great. I'm still concerned about the exemptions, specifically exemptions for historic buildings and the lighting of historic buildings. If only we would light these buildings as they were lit in the 1900s, then we wouldn't have a problem. I think that wording has to get tightened up. It shouldn't be an excuse to blast the neighborhood with lots of light. And I don't understand why a hospital emergency department would need a special exemption. I live across the street from one. We actually have a contract that they signed with the neighborhood that basically said your lighting has to be shielded. You can't shine light into the neighborhood. You have to light your pathway to the emergency room appropriately. And there's really no rationale that I can think of that a hospital or a hospital emergency room would be exempt from any of this.
I'm not commenting, I'm just
I know,
writing down,
I
so
understand.
I hope that people understand that. Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else?
I got two comments, I'll be really quick. One is really small, which is, hi, Glenn Heimiller, architectural lighting designer at Lamb Partners and also resident at 35 Mount Vernon Street. I would get rid of the color rendering index limit because it doesn't do anything. It has nothing to do with light pollution actually. And also, no one's going to install a low CRA fixture these days anyhow because everything is high already. So just keep it simple. what I'm hearing, if what I'm hearing is the direction you're going, sounds pretty good. I'm going to repeat what I think I'm hearing. You don't have to tell me what's right, which is that the performance method would be to comply with the LEED light pollution credit, and that would be required for all projects in the city above 10,000 square feet, whatever, regardless of where they are, right? And they would comply with the light pollution credit depending on what zone they're in, because the requirements change slightly depending if you're zone 3 or zone 2. So that zone map would be part of the ordinance.
Well, the areas would be part of it, we wouldn't reference them. They're
Okay,
actually-
whatever,
yeah,
list of
yes.
zone, whatever,
Yes.
that will be clearly defined in the ordinance. That sounds pretty good to me as someone who thinks about this stuff a lot, about light pollution control for large commercial projects. So that's my comment. I also say, if I can be of any assistance with crafting the language specifically about how you apply the LEED light pollution credit as the ordinance, I'd be happy to offer that informally, because I think, without sounding too big-headed, I probably know a lot more about the credit than anybody else in this room. So, and I also have dealt with, designing projects to comply with it too. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Marilyn Wellens, 651 Green Street. I appreciated the comments about indoor lighting being actually outdoor lighting, because the light actually does exit the building and affect the exterior. And I was interested in the change of title of the draft ordinance from lighting ordinance to outdoor lighting ordinance. I don't know whether that implies there will be an indoor lighting ordinance, or whether, I don't know. I point this out because I believe it is a major problem that will be coming with all the skyscrapers that are now, planned for the city, and the city is banking on, so to speak, in addition to the courthouse. So I point that out. I also don't like the exemptions. For example, playgrounds exempted. Have you been to the New King's School?
What is, I'm sorry?
Playgrounds. The city basically gets a free ride for anything it wants to do. And there are people who live next to city buildings and facilities, and they are affected the way other human beings are by light pollution, which again, point out, is a public health hazard. And on that point, again, I'll tell you that, your zones and the commercial zones, remember that these are mixed-use districts, and the city, with its affordable housing, inclusionary zoning rules, is causing people, and increasingly families with children in the public schools, to live in these buildings, and with the light that you are now setting standards for. So light pollution, like noise pollution, is known to interfere with proper sleep. It's known to interfere with ability to learn, concentration, as well as other public health things like diabetes, high blood pressure. These are public health issues that the stuff you're dealing with actually bears on. And I think that you've thought of it only in terms of the construction industry, the design industry, the city's tax base, and how it might look to one neighbor whose neighbor has an offending porch light. But I think it's much more complicated than that, and I don't think you're actually focusing, and I hope you do, on this aspect of it. Again, I've used 1030 Mass Ave as the example of indoor sources of light pollution, but I'd also like to point out that the point of now that I'm focusing on the outdoor, what that building could be like on the outside as it faces our abutting neighborhood is quite alarming. I mean, this question of 40-watt bulbs on 12-foot poles, there's a change of grade between our properties and the building's so-called grade as it abuts our property line. So, I mean, if you try to factor in that kind of light pollution from the outside, even with 40-watt bulbs at what, on 12-foot poles, at what space? Is there any limit? This is a problem that one of our neighbors, who's an engineer, has raised when he looked over the draft. You know, what we have is not adequate. I don't think it takes into account, for example, change of grade or the tall building. All right, so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else has a comment?
Kelly's over there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Hi, I'm Kelly Beatty. I work at 90 Sherman Street, not far from Glen. I've attended most of these meetings. I really like the way this is going. Thank you for that. Just two quick things, maybe three. One is that you know, you mentioned like noise pollution, and I don't think you should be afraid to create a standard for everybody, whether it be prescriptive or performance, that has as its ultimate backstop how much light are you allowing at the property line. In your noise pollution ordinance, you have a very detailed, you know, if I measure too many decibels at your property line, you're not in compliance. And decibels is a complicated thing, and you know, people don't know how many decibels they're emitting when they crank up their speakers, but you have an enforcement standard. And I think that come up with some lux measurement at the property line, both vertical and horizontal lumens, and make that a standard for all zones, right? That way, that's your ultimate backstop from somebody who wants to put 40-watt bulbs against their property limit, you know, a whole bank of them. You have a standard. You can say, too many lux, sorry, you're not in compliance. The second thing I wanted to mention is that you've got the potential here for two lighting ordinances, 720 and this one that you're developing. And you can say, idea, let's make them consistent with each other. I think there's a potential for confusion on the part of people who are trying to conform. Why not incorporate what you've got in 720 now into this new lighting ordinance and say it replaces 720 or however you want to do it? I think having two ordinances is a kind of... My last thing is, I'm on the board of directors for the IDA. We're holding to 3,000 Kelvin as reasonable, anything higher not reasonable. And so I would argue for the lowest color temperature. It's not like lighting up your city with candles. Modern fixtures, even at 3000 K, I think Paul and Glenn will back me up on this, still have a lot of blue light component to them, high color rendering index. It's a beautiful, warm, ambient kind of light, and I think you would like that. If you're concerned about somebody objecting to 3000 Kelvin, you know, you can't put a recommendation in, then say something like, you can have 4000, but it has to get you have to have a variance, you have to prove that you need it, or something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I did have my turn, but analogous to the noise ordinance, enforcement is a problem with the noise ordinance because the city has to go to court in order to enforce it, whereas the zoning ordinance enforcement is through the Inspectional Services Department, and this is a major, major difference. I point that out because anybody who followed the Idenix case knows that it's not the way to go. And I would point out that I believe, I'm not sure whether an electrical inspector in the building department would be charged with enforcing and vetting all building plans for compliance with the light changes, or whether you need someone who's more technically versed in that. I don't know, because I know that the Inspectional Services Department would greatly benefit from someone who were a noise inspector, because the building behind us, the affidavit was signed and it was a lie, and the building owner paid the price, and we're continuing to pay the price. So I'll point that out.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate, again, everybody's perseverance and support for this. I think we made some good progress today, and I will try my best to get our updated draft to you as soon as possible, sometime next week. I'm saying sometime instead of the but and also we'll have the minutes of the meeting up as well as the documents seen here tonight. We'll have those up hopefully in the next few days.
is it folded into the draft that we're gonna get?
Well, now we're working on multiple drafts, so I mean, legal has that one, so I'm kind of hesitant to have,
It's just so much easier to work with, that's all.
yeah. So, but I'll let you know what how I figure that out. Because we were working through things, and Ken and I talked about this a little bit, like, they're looking through things like comma placement, because it dramatically changes the legal text, the legal
Well, I
context.
understand, I find it,
Yeah.
some parts are incomprehensible to me because of the dedication and the snuggling. It was just, and I don't have so much time, I can't really figure it out. So it's not asking like.
Thank you, everybody.